Greetings. God's blessings to all of you who have joined us today. We're so glad you're with us. Jenna and I would like to welcome you to our webinar today. And most importantly, we'd like to welcome Deaconess Swenson from the great state of Iowa. What I didn't tell Deaconess Swenson is I'm a huge Hawkeye fan, so grew up in the state of Iowa. She's not all that far from Iowa City, so she is almost to the promised land. So it's a great place to be and to serve. And now Fairbank is still in Iowa District East, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yep, that's what I was thinking. So, okay, wonderful. Well, we've got some folks that looks like maybe still logging on, so we're gonna give this just another minute and then we'll get rolling with our presentation for today. Best thing about webcams is it doesn't show the mess outside of the view of the webcam on my desk.
I have like a tower of empty ice cream pails on my desk, so hopefully it doesn't fall over onto me. But I'm collecting them for a thing I'm doing.
It sounds like maybe a youth ministry thing or a outreach thing.
Close.
Yep.
It's a toddler music class thing.
Oh, cool. Fun. All righty. It looks like we're getting everybody in here. So again, welcome. Glad you guys are all with us today. God's blessings to you as we welcome Deaconess Swenson to talk to us about rural and small town congregations, partnership, ministry models, and the role of a deaconess. What a great resume Deaconess has on that and her experience, and she can really share with us some wonderful stuff today. Just by way of maybe you can hear the Advent hymns playing on the carillon in the background now. So by way of housekeeping today, if you have any questions for Deaconess while she's presenting, please, at the top left-hand side of the page, there's an attendee chat feature. If you expand that there with a little arrow, you can type in the attendee chat. Jenna has already sent you a message there, or you can go to the top of the top bar there, and there is an audience question button there, and feel free to type your questions in either place. I'll keep track of those questions as Deaconess is presenting, and then we'll have a little Q&A time at the end. All right, with that, let's go ahead and, oh, by the way, you will also have an opportunity at the end to download our the presentation for today. And as always, our webinars will be posted up on our website so that if you'd like to use this later or review it, the webinar recording will be there as well in our webinar archives. With that, then let's go to the Lord in prayer. Gracious Lord, we give you thanks for this day and in this season of Advent as we anticipate the celebration of the first Advent of our Savior Jesus and looking forward to his return. We know that in the meantime, there is much for us to do as his body, as the church. And there are various and many ways that you have called us to do so. As we look at some very unique models of ministry today, we pray your blessing be upon our time, upon our webinar, our presenter, and all who are attending, that this day might be a blessing, that we might go about that work which you have prepared in advance for us to do faithfully. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. All right, take it away, Deaconess.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Pastor. So I am obviously a deaconess, and I have had a lot of experience in the rural and small town congregation. I've been a deaconess since 2014, but my experience in rural congregations goes all the way back until birth, because I am a pastor's daughter. And my dad has been in many, many rural congregations and loves to serve in the rural and small town congregation, many farming communities, and just small towns. And so I've gotten to know a lot of the rural context. And then as a deaconess now, I've been able to serve in both North Dakota and now Iowa. And so I'm really excited to talk with you guys about the different things I've done as a deaconess, because I have never served just one congregation. Even on internship, I served two LCMS entities at a time. And so I want to encourage you guys, before I get too in depth, is as I'm presenting, write down things you're hearing, things you are liking about possibilities of where deaconesses or even other church workers, this isn't just a deaconess thing, but other church workers, and how you could call church workers or encourage other church workers to serve multiple in multiple areas. And so a little bit of background on me first. I talked, I'm a pastor's daughter, but I'm also married to a pastor. I met my husband at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, and he and I graduated seminary at the same time, and we're both called to North Dakota. And so in North Dakota, we were there for 4 years before before my husband was called to Iowa. And I, of course, followed him, and now have a call here in Iowa as well. And part of, so being a pastor's wife and having to follow him on top of being a deaconess, pastor's wife comes first. So I've had to get creative when looking for deaconess work, and I've been very blessed in that there's been some needs in the area, and I've been able to fit into many different contexts very well as a deaconess. And I also want to say, I should probably say, I also have a new baby, which is really exciting. His name is Gideon, and so he's 3 months old. And so that's about me. So what I'm gonna do is speak about my own the situations that I've been in and been called to, and hopefully you can glean from that some ideas. I think it's important to remember that every congregation is different. They each have their unique things that they need. So, for example, some congregations need an organist desperately, where another congregation just needs help with their shut-in visits. And so there's the needs of the congregations, but then there's also the skills of the church worker or the deaconess. And so those are things you have to consider if you're looking into having a partnership, is what are the skills of the deaconess, and more importantly, what are our needs as a congregation or our needs as a registered service organization or institution. So I first want to start with Acts chapter 6, which we've heard many times. Now in these days when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists arose against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. And the 12 summoned the full number of disciples and said, "It is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word." So the important thing about this, not reading into it too much, but in this context, talking about there's only so much time in the day. God only gave us 24 hours. And our pastors, is important for them to first and foremost be preaching the word of God and administering the sacrament. After that, pastors, it's important to be doing, the mercy care of the church as they have time. But in many congregations and many entities, pastors don't have the time to do everything that needs to be done. So that's where other church workers come in handy, and other just members of the congregation to step up and do things that that are important in the life of the church, but they're not. They're not the preaching and administering of the sacraments. So, I'm going to talk about really quickly what a deaconess is. If you go to the LCMS website, you'll see this on there too. LCMS deaconesses are women who are professional church workers trained to share the gospel of Jesus Christ through ministry of works of mercy, spiritual care, teaching the Christian faith. Deaconess comes from the Greek word diakonos, meaning servant. Phoebe, named in Romans 16, was a helper to Paul and others, and she is often considered the first deaconess. So I'll just explain this picture really quickly, because that is Reverend Dr. Masaki from the seminary in Fort Wayne. And we both were speakers in Ethiopia a few years back for a conference on women in the church. So I obviously talked about deaconesses in that case. But deaconesses, basically everything, if I were to sum it up, what are deaconesses? Everything we do points people to the pastor, the church, where they receive the most important gifts. So forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation. So we are doing things basically on the ground level, caring for those in need, reaching out to those marginalized in society, teaching the children and the women of the church, many different things, but everything that we do points to the pastor and the altar. So that's who we are as deaconesses. So deaconesses serve, my best knowledge, or my own personal gift, I guess, or where I serve the most, is in congregations and churches. But deaconesses also serve in our synods, RSOs, registered service organizations, also in institutions such as nursing homes and hospitals. And then there's also a lot of deaconesses serving abroad in international missions. And there are even deaconesses, I think, there are deaconesses serving in national missions as well. But I'm going to focus mostly on the congregation and also RSOs, because it's hard to also serve on international missions when you're serving a church in the United States. So what are ways deaconesses can serve in the church? And I have kind of a list of a bunch, and there's way more possibilities out there of how deaconesses can serve in a church. And this is where thinking outside of the box is good. I'm going to list a few of the things that I do, especially. But how do we serve in the church? We encourage the church in acts of mercy. So we aren't the only mercy doer in the congregation, because that's not really what the church is about. The church is about everyone caring for the needs of each other and the community. But we do encourage and maybe make available means of works of mercy for the church. We pray on behalf of people. We care for women in situations that pastors cannot. That is a big one for deaconesses. For example, and I'll maybe talk about this a little bit later, but right now I'm serving at part of my call is campus ministry, and a lot of the stuff that women face here on campus, a lot of cultural temptations regarding sexuality, and a lot of rape going on, just a lot of different things that, a woman who has been raped, it's hard to come and talk to a male pastor about that situation. Some women can, but a lot of women cannot. So having a female presence in the church, such as a deaconess, is really good for that. other thing is miscarriages and women struggling with miscarriages and whatnot. So there's a lot of situations where it's easier for a woman to care. Meanwhile, I do want to say it's very important. Like, as deaconesses, we are trained, in spiritual matters. We can care for women, but ultimately we do point them to the pastor for what's most important, which is confession of sins and forgiveness. So that is part of our job as deaconesses, pointing to the pastor. But then we do more of the listening, if that makes sense. So we also education of women and children. Sometimes Sunday school superintendent. Sometimes it's women's Bible study. And I'll get more into that later as well. And caring for the marginalized in society. Everything from caring for those who are poor and needy, caring for people with disabilities. There's many different possibilities. Talked a little bit about campus ministry. Music. I am a musician. Actually, my bachelor's degree is in music. And so I utilize music a lot in my deaconess ministry. I talked a little bit about miscarriages and stillbirth, rape, life advocacy. That's a big thing that deaconesses can do. Women's Bible study, organists. I could list many other things, but I'm going to keep moving. So what are ways deaconesses serve in institutions and RSOs? So deaconesses can serve as chaplains. However, I have to put this caveat: deaconesses do not do like lead services or preach. So they will maybe lead Bible studies with the women in care centers or devotions. Deaconesses also visit a lot in care centers, so just listening to people, and that's one thing that we do. So like there are a lot of like Lutheran family villages throughout the LCMS that could call a deaconess, or that you could team up with to call a deaconess. That would be a possibility for deaconesses serving as chaplains. But then there's also RSOs, and many RSOs in Synod. So think about the RSOs that are around you. I've had a lot of conversations with one that's around us here in Iowa, which is Lutheran Family Services. And they are very gun-ho about deaconesses, and they want deaconesses really bad, actually. But they're the ones I've had a lot of talks with about partnerships and how that would look. They really want Christian counselors. Some deaconesses are trained social workers and trained counselors. Not all deaconesses are, but some are. And so Lutheran Family Services really wants deaconess counselors that can work for them because of their theological background and their desire to not be divorce counseling, but marriage counseling. And so that's just one thing that they've been really longing for. I put Bethesda Lutheran Communities down because I actually did work with them on my internship while also serving a congregation. And then David's Heart, which I'm going to get into more, that is probably one of the newest RSOs in Synod now. And they are an organization that is a resource for church music development, and raising up future church musicians. And they're a resource to congregations who are maybe in the place to have all these music conservatories. And I work with them right now, and so I thought I would mention them because I'm going to be talking about them in a little bit. So I'm just going to quickly talk about my situations. And like I said before, just be thinking about like, how could something like this work? A partnership where you share a deaconess or share another church worker. So I had on my internship, so this is before I became an official deaconess, I served part-time with Bethesda, caring for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I wasn't the one doing the caring, but I was the one doing advocating for people with disabilities, and most importantly, advocating for their religious life. So making sure that their caretakers were bringing them to church because they wanted to go to church. Also helping provide resources, faith resources for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then I also serve Shepherd of the City Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne. This is not a small town congregation. It's actually a large town urban congregation, kind of in a part of Fort Wayne that had seen better days. And the church itself served that community. And so I had interned there as well. And at Shepherd of the City, I would visit shut-ins, and you can see in this picture, I'm visiting one of the shut-ins, and she was just very lonely and really needed physical touch. It's so weird talking about visiting people right now with COVID going on around us, but what I did, and then we also had a deaconess field worker, is we went and we would go visit her and do her nails, and it was just a really simple thing. But it was one of those mercy care things, and we would talk about everything in life, faith things and whatnot. But that was one of the things. I also did a lot with the kids, and also a lot with reaching out to the neighborhood. We had Thanksgiving meal there every year. I helped organize Hymn Festival, just many different things that I would do. And so Bethesda and Shepherd of the City were two very different entities in the LCMS, but it worked out really well for me to share my time between the two. And it worked out well, especially for each of them, because they only needed part-time. And I think Shepherd of the City probably could only have afforded part-time at that point in time. So it worked out really well for both of them. And then when I had my call to North Dakota, I actually kind of worked for three different churches. Three different churches, but one of the churches had a daycare preschool that I also worked with. And so I'll explain. I should probably turn it for you. There we go. I'll explain kind of what I did at each and how that worked out. So St. John Lutheran Church is in Hillsboro, North Dakota, small town church, right off of I-29. If you know North Dakota at all, it's between Fargo and Grand Forks. And St. John Lutheran Church is probably where initially I spent most of my time, because that's where we lived. My husband was called to a dual parish in Hillsboro and then Hope, North Dakota, which that church is on the next page. But here at St. John's, I did, I guess one of the main things I did was work with the youth of the congregation. We had what was called KIC, which is short for Kids into Christ, and LYF, Lutheran Youth Fellowship, which I led, and I organized a lot of events for the kids. This picture, you see the KIC. They were more like late elementary, middle school age kids. And then I did a lot as well there with music. So I led Sunday school music stuff. We had 4 organists, which is crazy. That doesn't happen very often. We just rotated. So we played once a month, except for Advent and Lent, and then we played twice a month. So I would organize the organists. I would also organize, I restarted the choir. It hadn't been going in 10 or 15 years before I got there. And so I was able to get a small choir going. It was simple. We usually just sang verses of hymns, maybe the psalm, but it was a really good way to add to the worship and the glory of God in the service. And then another thing, one big project that I did while I was at St. John was we built a playground for the community, because on our side of town, there was no playground. And so kids would have to cross the railroad tracks and the busy highway to get to any playground in town. So we built a playground on our side of town in our neighborhood so that the kids would have a safe place to play without having to cross those dangerous places. And so that was a big project I did. And it was one of those things where I recognized a need in the community and thought, this is a way that we can witness to our community and also meet more people in our community. And so that was St. John's. Emmanuel, I did, was up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. So a little bit bigger community, bigger church as well. But it was a great partnership because I was able to work more deaconess hours with them. It started out, I worked 4 hours a week. By the time I left, I was working up there 20 hours a week. And between everything, I was working almost full time as a deaconess. So at Emmanuel, some of the big things I did is I started a Bible study for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in a local center that people would go to like on a daily basis just to spend their day. And so we did a Bible study there, and it was a way to reach out to that community of people in Grand Forks. And I was also able to get a lot of our congregation members involved in that, which was really good. So we had many of the ladies, all ladies, and then pastors too. They would sometimes come, which was great. We would organize the Bible study, go sing, lead the Bible study, talk with them, just care for them in whatever ways they needed while we were there. And then this is a big one. And actually we had gotten an email earlier about this today, is shut-in visits. There are a lot of churches, including Emmanuel, that had a ton of shut-ins. And what I hear from pastors a lot of the time is, I have a lot of shut-ins and I visit them frequently. Most pastors, talk about once a month. They visit their shut-ins to give them communion and do a little service and talk with them. But our shut-ins the pastors were recognizing that our shut-ins needed more care, kind of like the widows in Acts. They just needed more time with people. They're lonely. And so I would try to go usually on like 2 weeks after pastor would go, when I could, and just visit with them. And many of them were just lonely and needed someone to talk with. And I would talk to some of them for 1 to 2 hours even, just as a caring for them and giving them that human interaction and human contact. And some shut-ins as well, who had maybe trouble hearing, or who were struggling with dementia. Even just going, and I would just sit and sing to them for 15, 20 minutes. That's all they really needed, but they were able to then, a lot of them recall those hymns that they grew up with that I would sing. And then some of them wouldn't, like, I would introduce them to new hymns, and they still love that too, because the words of comfort that our Lutheran hymnody would bring them was beautiful. And so, and I would also, sing hymns that fit the season. So, Pastor was talking about how the Advent hymns are going on as Carolyn, so I would be singing Advent hymns right now, or Christmas hymns during Christmas time, Easter hymns during Easter time, just bringing them the different hymns of the season. The church brought them a lot of comfort. So shut-in visits is one way that I think, especially now, especially now as our churches are aging, maybe post-COVID, because we can't get into a lot of facilities right now, but having a deaconess is really good to help care for those aging in our congregations. And a lot of deaconesses that they're just so good at visiting people. That's one of the big areas that we are trained in and trained to do. So, and then also at Emmanuel, I led a women's Bible study, a summer book club, just different things involving the women. I didn't do much with the youth there just because of my work schedule and how it worked out. But you can see here in the picture, I worked with the local hospital and asked them, what are your needs? We want to care for mothers who have lost their babies. And they're like, we need outfits for babies so that the mothers can hold their babies that have died, and without having to, hold a bland hospital blanket. So the ladies in our congregation came together and like, let's make them outfits. So that's what you see in this picture, are a bunch of outfits that we worked together to make for the hospital. And then also in North Dakota, about 2 hours a week of my time were spent at Emmanuel, but they had a daycare and preschool, and I would follow Pastor around to each daycare room. He would lead them in a little chapel Bible story in their room, and then I would follow him and lead them in singing that usually had something to do with what Pastor's lesson was about, just teaching them the faith a little more through music. And so that's what that picture is one of the I think it was like the 2-year-old room. And then I would actually go into the preschool rooms with Pastor while he did chapel, and then we would together lead the kids in a song. And when I say song, I mean a hymn. We would teach them hymns, and anyone who says that preschoolers cannot learn hymns never has tried teaching preschoolers hymns, because those kids pick those hymns up so fast. It blows my mind. It's really cute, actually. So anyway, and then lastly, so the one church I haven't talked about yet is Trinity Lutheran Church, and that was a part of the dual parish with St. John in Hillsboro. And they were a small church on I forget how big that town is, like 200 or 300 people. But they would do a VBS every year, and that's all they wanted from me, is help us with VBS, help us with the music, help us with the curriculum. So I wrote the VBS for 1 or 2 years for them, and they threw this giant VBS where every single kid in the community came for 1 week, and that was their thing that they would do. And that's the thing that they wanted me to help them with. So it was one small tiny thing in 1 week of the year. Granted, it took a lot of weeks build up to it with the writing and preparation, but That's all they had asked me to do as a deaconess. And so that's another idea, is just having like a church who needs something, just even if it's a small thing, like teaming up with them and like, yeah, let's work together, get a deaconess or another church worker who can help us with these needs that we have. And so finally, in Iowa, which is where I am now, I'm in Fairbank, Iowa, where when we arrived, they had no organist. They had been singing to the CDs for a couple years. They had some subs here and there, but otherwise they were singing to CDs. And so 2 weeks after I got there, I've been playing organ for them ever since. I took a break after Gideon was born, but I'm now back. And so that's what I do there, is just every Sunday in and out, I play organ for them because that's their need. And then I also then mostly then work now at College Hill Lutheran Church during the week, part-time. And I work with the college students. So College Hill, I should say, is in Cedar Falls, Iowa, which I'm 35 miles away. No, sorry, 35 minutes away, 20 miles. And it's an easy, so it's an easy commute for me. And I work with college students, is one of my things. Working with the women I talked about. I also have been doing a lot with, I've started a lot with life advocacy. We're hoping to get a room set up to work with our local pregnancy center so that they can be closer to campus, UNI, University of Northern Iowa, so that they can be closer to UNI than Planned Parenthood. And that's our goal, because the pregnancy center is a little bit of a drive. It's not too terribly far away, but it's in Waterloo. And we just want to get them close. Like, we are just like a block from campus. So that's what I've been doing. So like life advocacy, and campus ministry. Eventually I'll be doing shut-in visits. I haven't had a chance to meet the shut-ins yet because I started right as COVID started, which stinks. But then the last thing and then the other big thing I've been doing for College Hill is a few years ago, they started a music conservatory. And the conservatory is basically, it's a parish-based music. I can't think of the word right now, but it's a parish-based conservatory where we teach music, and the goal is to raise up future church musicians for whatever church the kids end up at. And David's harp, which I alluded to a little bit earlier when I was talking about RSOs, is developing resources and also helping congregations who want to start music conservatories. And so College Hill started one because we have a ton of UNI music majors, and it gives them a really good chance to teach music before they end up going out and teaching music in the classroom. And it also gives us a chance to reach out to the community to provide lessons in a Christian environment. And so I took on the directorship of this role. We are small still, but we are growing. And the cool thing is, with having this, having a lot of students who are members of our campus ministry here at College Hill Lutheran, but they're also music majors, having that relationship. We have trombone instructor, a trumpet instructor, saxophone instructor, clarinet, voice. We have all these different opportunities and ways that we can connect with each other, and also teach the faith through music, which obviously you can probably tell is a passion of mine, is I get to do music along with being a deaconess and the theology of it. So it's kind of a lot of ideas that I'm throwing out there. There are many more ideas that you could probably have. Like I said, I want you to be creative. How can I meet with, the other pastors in my circuit? Ask yourself that question to maybe be able to call a deaconess to visit all of our shut-ins. Maybe between all of your congregations in your circuit, you might have a lot of shut-ins, and to have a deaconess just constantly visiting shut-ins, that could be all she does, or she could be doing other things too. But I want to encourage you to think outside the box. Think about who's around you. It doesn't have to be close. I know a deaconess who served a circuit in, I think it was Kentucky, and that circuit far apart because Kentucky doesn't have as many Lutheran churches as Iowa does for now. And so she would drive miles upon miles to be visiting for all these churches. And I think she also worked with youth as well. So between youth and shut-ins, I think that was her big thing, her two big things that she would do between all those congregations. But it worked out really well for her, and it worked out for those congregations as well. And each congregation kind of paid her as she would serve them and as they needed. And that's kind of how her situation worked out. So first of all, who do you contact then? If you want a deaconess, contact your district office, I think, is your first spot after you've, talked with your circuit or whoever you want to team up with to get a deaconess. Talk to your district office. But I know you can also contact, if you just want to be like, where do we find deaconesses? Or how can we advertise this job to deaconesses? Concordia Deaconess Conference is the affiliation that all deaconesses that wear that on their shoulder. We're all LCMS deaconesses. So you want to contact, if you want, you can contact Concordia Deaconess Conference. An email goes out with a job description that we all get. And if there's deaconesses that are interested, they will apply. But then if you want a deaconess right out of school, there's Concordia University Chicago, Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which I'm biased towards because that's my alma mater. But they're all great programs. I know a lot of people from each one. And also, of course, that Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. So there's options there as well. And I'm sure there's other places too that I just don't know about because I'm just a regular old deaconess. Do contact them, and they can also help explain, like, if you want to know more about deaconesses or want to know more about how this would work. I also know there's a lot of deaconesses who are trained out there, but currently do not have calls that might even be living in your area. So calling these programs, Concordia Chicago, CTSFW, CSL, calling them and just being like, hey, do you know of anyone who lives in Nebraska who might be near me that could help us with whatever we need? So, and finally, here's just some references. We have website references of things I talked about. If you want to go find out more information about those things. And then at the bottom of that list is my email, which I'm happy to chat with you about anything. And You can call me too. I realize I didn't put my number on there. So it's area code 218-329-8515. However, I think your best bet, you can talk to me about like how like these partnerships work, but your best bet probably to find out about like more about Deaconesses and stuff, like I said, is going to the programs themselves and talking to them. So that's all I have for now until the questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Deaconess Faith. That's fantastic information. And I two things I noted, especially towards the end here. Number one, I'm just a regular old deaconess. You've worn so many hats. Come on now. Thanks be to God for that diversity and your willingness to be so flexible in what you want to do. You said be creative. And if there's one thing that when I talk to congregations about looking at partnerships, being creative is one of the key terms that I've used. And so I appreciate the fact that you've walked the walk. So that's wonderful. God's blessings to you for that. And also, good job being biased towards CTSFW with Deaconess Rast on the webinar today. So that was
really?
that was slick.
You have been giving that.
So very good. She would have been so disappointed if you wouldn't have done that. So I'm so glad she's with us. Just a couple of things that I noted. I don't have any questions in yet. Please make sure you get your questions into the chat feature as soon as you can. That would be fantastic. But we just a couple of things I noted. Number one is that creative thing. But as you're looking at, perhaps you're in an area, and I should say on the side, if you have any questions regarding partnerships in general and how to approach some of these situations, these conversations, don't hesitate to get a hold of us at RSTM. We have a lot of resources, and we can point you to a lot of resources on how to formulate these, both on the creative end as well as the kind of the substance or the legal end. How do we formulate these things? But your creativity, and maybe a question that some folks might wonder: how do you start to broach the question? How do you go out and even start having these conversations with the various entities with which you might work? So often we get territorial. So often we fear change. How do you even broach the question?
I went in both cases with North Dakota and here in Iowa. I went to the circuit visitor usually and had the conversation with the circuit visitor first, who then was very gung-ho, like, oh, let me talk to the other people in the circuit, or come to our circuit, talk to us, talk about how a deaconess might be useful to them, and then let's talk about how we can work together. So that's usually what I do. The thing is, circuits and all, some circuits are also close to other circuits. So in this case, like I live in Iowa East Westgate Circuit, but College Hill is actually in the Waterloo Circuit. But it's not that far away that I'm able to, be in both circuits and serve in both circuits. So just talking, I would say the biggest thing is getting the circuit visitor on your side.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to point people. I think a lot of times we kind of forget that circuit visitor can be a great advocate, and he kind of knows the needs of the congregations out there, and interacting with the circuit and just starting to plant seeds. That's a great way to point people. I think we forget sometimes just how valuable the circuits are, and that collaboration opportunity there.
Yeah, and for me, I do have to say it did take time. I think the official call for me here didn't come until a year and a half after we had moved to Iowa. So it took time and patience and talking. I had to do a lot of that work. But also another person I should mention is the district president. President Saunders, I had a conversation with him, and that also really helped as well. So,
yeah, definitely having the district on even just aware of the opportunity, and so people can start to talk about things. You had mentioned Lutheran family services. Just getting like I said, planting the seeds out there with different RSOs, recognized service organizations, or other congregations through the circuits. You never know what's going to grow out of it until you throw it out there. We do not. I say this repeatedly. We do not have because we do not ask, and I think in the church we can be bold enough to ask. The worst we can hear is no, and that's not all that bad. So just something you mentioned right at the beginning, which I really appreciated. Look at the needs of the congregations versus the skills of the worker, and what makes sense. I really appreciated that you mentioned that. That I think all too often we decide our staffing model for ministry, and then we look to fill the staffing model rather than look at the needs and then determine our staffing model based upon the needs of the congregation. I think I would assume that's how things kind of formulated as you were working these different partnerships together.
Yeah, a lot of it actually, the College Hill started out with the Conservatory because Pastor Wagner, our circuits, the Waterloo and Westgate circuit, twice a year get together and have a circuit meeting together. And Pastor Wagner, who's here at College Hill, met my husband, Pastor Swenson, and they were just chatting. And I think my husband mentioned I was a piano teacher, and Pastor Wagner's like, we need a piano teacher for the Conservatory. And so that's how it started, and then it just grew out of that.
Oh, very cool. I got to say, I so appreciate you sharing the David's harp. I had not heard of that RSO yet. Usually I've got a pretty good cue into that, just given my connection with the Synod, but I hadn't heard of that one. And I've heard of these conservatories popping up in various places. They actually started one in my first parish that I was called out of the seminary to, and I think it's doing very well. I think it's so exciting. So desperately need musicians. Not very many congregations, especially rural congregations, have 4 organists. That's pretty rare.
Yeah. It is
right
rare.
now, because ours is on having some health issues, so we have 0 currently. So we're trying to figure out how to raise them up ourselves.
Yeah. Well, my greatest goal is I would like the organ to be played at my funeral. So I need to make that happen.
There you go. Oh, that's a great way to think about that. Okay, good. Got to make sure there's a musician available that can still play an organ by then. Right. Oh, I love that. I also really appreciated when you it's not really something you mentioned, but it kind of plays into that idea of determining our staffing based upon the needs of the congregation. Partnerships, and if I could hammer this point home again, partnerships are not a way to save money. You don't do things just so you can get by on the cheap. You do things so that you accomplish the ministry that the Lord has called us to accomplish in that place for that time. And I think you did a great job of illustrating how that makes sense to form the partnership and not just try to figure out how we can scrape by and not affect our budget anymore. I appreciated that. And especially, and this was the thing that I thought illustrated, you did one thing for 1 week, right, with that VBS. That it doesn't have to be this grand scale kind of a thing. If you're helping a congregation do their one big thing for one time, granted, like you said, I'm sure it was weeks of prep, especially if you were writing curriculum. Wow. I haven't even endeavored to do that for a VBS. So, but just doing that one, helping them to accomplish that one big outreach event every year, that was enormous for that congregation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to be that creative. I think that's fantastic. All right, folks, I don't see any other questions, and we are rapidly approaching the 2:00 hour. So not seeing any, I would encourage you, take a peek. Our 2021 webinar schedule has not been put up yet, but we're going to do that very, very soon. So we've got some coming up, and I'm trying to open up my publication schedule, which I had open, but for some reason it closed on me. Here we go. So we'll be talking in January on the 7th with Deaconess Tiffany Maynor. You said we have deaconesses working for the Office of National Mission, and there's one of them. Yeah, we're going to be talking about life ministry topics. So very near and dear to the work that you're doing there as well. So and that's so exciting to hear that you're trying to move something closer to Cedar Falls from Waterloo. That's great as well. And then we're going to be looking at parish nursing on February 18th. And so check those out. We'd be happy to have you join us for those webinars. And then once we get to March, we're actually talking to the folks with the Perry Lutheran Home and Lutheran Family Services. So we're getting lots of crossover today. So how exciting. But I don't see any questions. So God's blessings to you all. Thank you so much, Deaconess Swenson, for joining us today and telling us all about your experience and how folks can use that to impact their communities with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you all for being on with us today. God's blessings to you all. We'll see you soon.